Good afternoon, preppers. Welcome to Goshen Prepping. Thanks for joining us. Understand that sometimes a situation may present itself in which you must bug out. And that situation is nothing less than you dying. So if you're in a situation that literally your life depends on it, you're going to have to get out of town. However, if your life doesn't depend on it, then bugging in, or as they say, shelter in place, is going to be your best bet always. And I mean always too. And preparing for that situation is even more important. So this video is your guide for bugging in and how to do it effectively so you can actually do very well. But again, I always say stay to the end, but even more so now, because at the end I'm going to give you some practical advice, some things to do to make it so bugging in will save your life. Number one, your shelter. Have you ever lost power, especially during the wintertime, and your furnace was not working? I mean, for us, we have a wood stove, but even then, without a solar generator, our fans are not going to push the heat around. And you know very quickly how cold your house can get. So when people look at bugging out, I'll ask them, if you're not going to be in your house with lots of nice thick walls and insulation, but you're going to be in a tent or, possibly in a car, if you're going to bug out in your car, what's it going to be like? Without heat in those situations, it's going to be far worse. Not to mention your house is your best shelter. For bugging in, staying in place, it's already keeping the rain and snow off your head and keeping you insulated, more importantly, from those elements. Your car and a tent don't have the insulation, even though they may keep the snow and rain off your head. In comparison, in other words, your house is exceedingly very warm and dry. Even if you don't have a heating source, your house is going to keep you warmer by far than outside in a tent any day. Even an apartment too, by the way, because often apartments are joined up well with other apartments and there's actually a collective heat. It actually makes it so the heat doesn't seep out from the apartment complex faster. You'll actually stay warm. Now, I still recommend you have a tent. And I'm not saying that you may not need to bug out. That may happen. But actually having a tent in your house during those times is actually even more advantageous because as you spend a lot of time in your tent, your body heat will actually keep you warmer in that situation. So, although your tent or car may not give you a lot of protection for bugging out, a tent in your house can do very well for you. Number two, supplies. Even if the amount of food and water you have in your home is limited, maybe you haven't had a lot of time to actually stockpile. Maybe you just moved. But you know what? It's still going to be far more than what you can actually fit into a backpack and off you go. Not to mention all those things you have in your house. Even if you don't actually have any real prepping things, you still have prepping things. You have pots and pans, you have medical supplies, you have blankets, extra clothes. The list goes on, doesn't it? So many things you actually have. And if you bug out, even if you bug out in a car, you are limited in the amount of space you have. So how much can you carry in your backpack? Nothing compared to what you actually have in your house. Your supplies are right here. And let's not forget about actually one of the most important preps, because I'm suspecting during that time YouTube may not be available, books. Books are huge. We actually have a huge library of prepping books. Sometimes we read through them. Sometimes they're for storing away, so that way later on, if crap hits the fan, we can pull it out and say, oh, look, we probably should be doing with this. Heading out, let's say you do have a really good backpack and you're strong enough to carry it, or you have enough to put in your car and enough gas to go, you're still limiting your supplies, but books are heavy. You're definitely going to have a hard time with that as well. So again, another reason for bugging in instead of bugging out is all your supplies you actually have at hand in your home. Number three, community. Even if you don't get along with your neighbors, they're still your neighbors. And I've seen it so many times where maybe you have a neighbor who is just a jerk and you're always not getting along with them. And when crap hits the fan and people get put into that very scary, desperate, dark situation, they're not sure what's happening, suddenly those neighbors, even the neighbors you loathe the most, sometimes will become your best friends because you actually have things in common at this point, and that's called survival. All those petty differences will get pushed by the wayside. I'm not saying it'll happen all the time, but you definitely have a much better chance. So communities will often join together in trouble times. In fact, it's during peacetime. I mean, right now it's peacetime. How many of your neighbors do you actually even know? Not many. In Florida, we actually lived in a cul-de-sac with, I think, like 9 houses with an odd number, I remember that, and we got hit by a tornado. Most of the houses on the block after that were uninhabitable. Our house got through it mostly. But some of the neighbors I had never spoken with before. I wanted to, it just never presented itself, and now suddenly there we all are working together to help each other out. Nobody got hurt, by the way, that's a good thing. But understand, in third world countries, especially when we talk about countries without actually having security from the government, it's exceedingly common for the neighbors to band together and have watches together. Roving patrols armed patrols, and they'll actually use lethal force if necessary. And that's something in the military we always had to deal with and watch out for, because when you're wandering in somebody else's neighborhood, which you'll be doing if you're bugging out, suddenly you're the infiltrator, they don't know who you are, and you are the security risk. So try to stay in your community if possible. And of course, ahead of time, try to work with establishing that community. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Number 4, home field advantage. Do you like sports? Are you familiar with a home field advantage? Even in sports where the football field is pretty much uniform every single stadium and the baseball field itself is uniform every single stadium, there's actually a home field advantage where you'll find that more points are scored by the home team just statistically. You're more comfortable there. You spent a lot of time there. You didn't have the stresses of traveling, going somewhere. So having all that stuff in your neighborhood by you not bugging out is incredibly advantageous. You have your own home field advantage. And we're not talking about necessarily just outside in your front yard, but let's say that in your neighborhood, crap's hit the fan, there's not a lot of food, and you do need to go out. You already know where everything is. You know where all the nooks and crannies are, the alleys if you want to take the back way. You know whose houses are whose. You know the areas you'll actually want to go through or to avoid. Whereas going into a community, when you're not having that home field advantage, you're going to have a much more difficult time. Every single corner at that point may become a threat. Every dark alley, you'll be looking at it saying, should I go down that alley? So having the home field advantage, of course, combining that with community, which we mentioned, is seriously advantageous and will actually make bugging in so much more vital. You'll actually survive it. Number 5, energy expenditure. This is a huge one when it comes to bugging in. If you ever are put in a situation where you need to bug out, you don't know. I mean, maybe some of you know who've actually experienced this, but most people don't know how much energy you need to actually expend, physically speaking, trying to simply survive. You're out and about looking for water, looking for a food source, using energy to simply protect yourself or protect your group. Because in those situations, even if you're actually in a relatively safe place, maybe like Hurricane Katrina, and they actually have you staying in like the Superdome, I love using that example, you're still sleeping with one eye open. You have no idea what that person next to you is going to do. Are they going to steal your shoes? Is there going to be problems as far as violence go? You'll never know. Granted, you will use energy at your house too, if you actually have it set up where you're going to be bugging in, obviously. But the energy trying to find food and water at your house, at least you're going to be sleeping in your own bed. At least you're going to be sleeping in your own surroundings. At least you're going to be sleeping with a community that you know. And your sleep and rest itself is going to be better. And therefore, you will not actually have to worry about as much energy expenditure. Combined with, again, you already have your food and water in your house also. And the final category, practical tips. So the 5 things we looked at as far as why you want to bug in, lots more besides that, by the way, and you can add them to the list in the comments below if you like. But practical tips is what we're all about in Goshen Prepping. So we want to talk about, practically speaking, what you can do to make sure you're better prepared for bugging in. Now, the first thing I want to mention is you need to have an alternate heat source. Even if you live in the South, having something like just to get a buddy heater. If you actually live midway up or even north, you might want to consider putting a wood stove in. Granted, I know they're not cheap. They're expensive to put in, and they're starting with more and more regulations on that. But it is something you should seriously consider. You need to obviously stockpile supplies, not just food and water, even though that's the case too, equipment for cooking, medical. You need to organize it all and have it at the ready. Now, I'm not saying you need to have it so it's all sitting out all the time. We actually have tubs, and our tubs are in strategic locations. So when that day comes, we'll simply grab the tub. Look, here's all our medical tubs, and here's our tubs that has all our cooking gear. Here's our tubs that holds all the stuff for backpacking, whatever the case may be. Now, understanding all the things you need to stockpile is important too, obviously. And I actually have former videos. You can go through and look at those. You're welcome to do it. I do actually compile a checklist of all the things you may want to consider stockpiling though. And if you look in the description below, you can click on the link to our website, to the store on our website, and you can pick up the entire set of all the checklist for $12. It's not something you have to do. You can go through the old videos and look for it there too. But you know what? It helps us out if you do want to pick it up, one of those little packs, and we do appreciate it. But again, just pick up the very first one listed there for $12, and it includes all the checklist. Don't buy the other checklist too, because you'll be getting double. All right. Even more importantly, and this is so vital, you need to practice with your gear. Get your gear, take a couple days, maybe even shut off your power. Or, you know what, actually have like a week during the summer if you have the time and say, okay, this is my week to truly practice and truly getting through all my gear and seeing if I can survive with it. Pretend the crap has hit the fan. Turn off your radio, turn off your TV. Again, turn off all your power, or see if you can actually get it so your little crank radio or solar power radio will actually work. There's nothing worse than that situation really happening and you've never tried out your gear, only to find out that you didn't have all the stuff for your gear or you're not familiar with it. We talked about energy expenditure. You're going to be putting far more energy in just to get your little cooker going than you definitely need to. So you can keep practicing so when crap really does hit the fan, it won't be so traumatic. It's still going to be traumatic, but not near as much because, of course, that's why we're preppers. And I mentioned before, let's talk about it now, you need to establish a community. You need to talk to your immediate neighbors, next door, across the street. You'll find that if you don't get along with a certain neighbor, once you actually get to know them and vice versa, you'll often find yourself getting a little bit better with them. We all have those neighbors, though. There's not always a situation. But do not tell them you have food. Do not tell them you're a prepper. You can talk about how, you know what, I try to actually have a little bit put away just in case something happens, but it's not much. What do you do? So go down that path, but do not reveal your items ever. That is so important. But you can say to them, listen, things aren't going so well. I'm really worried about fill in the blank. A depression, World War III, whatever basically you feel like that's something you need to prepare for. See if they have those same kind of thoughts as well. And to say, listen, if crap hits the fan, we should join together. And even though that sounds weird, it's actually a good thing to do ahead of time because when crap does hit the fan, guess what? You're going to be the first person they think of. Hey, such and such came over and talked about this. Something else you can do too, and you'll be amazed how well this works. How this works is put flyers up around town. In our town, we have a library. We can put one there. We can put one in. There's a big sporting goods store in town for hunting and fishing and such. Put one up there. Even put it basically on Facebook Marketplace, that you actually want to have a group join together. And you'll be amazed, and I'm not kidding you, you'll be amazed how many people in your area have thought about this, thought about getting together, but didn't know there was somebody else in town. Because again, when you're a prepper, either people like you're crazy or you don't want to let people know what's going on. So a lot of preppers kind of keep to themselves, not that they don't want to, they want to have a community. It's just sometimes you're kind of like, showing them what you have as far as your ability to want to prep. It may actually be a little bit dangerous, but like-minded people helps out a lot. And especially if crap does hit the fan, maybe there's one very close to you, that would be advantageous as well. We moved here, we've lived here for years. And it wasn't until the channel I found out there's somebody on our road who's a prepper, a big prepper. And we've become very good friends with them. So I'm sure the same situation would happen to you. You simply just got to be able to reach out and find them. Again, putting flyers around will show you amazingly how many preppers you actually have in your area. Now, I'll say it again, and I want to stress it. If your life depends on it, you need to bug out. And actually having a bug out bag and for those purposes or a bug out tub for your car or something is incredibly important. But I want to persuade you. I want you to have a little bit of paradigm shift and realize that bugging out is not your best friend. And actually instead getting things ready for bugging in is in almost every case going to be much better for you. Think about it this way. If you bug in for a month and then have to bug out, well, guess what? You've already now had a month of basically staying healthy in your home. You had enough food and water, and now you bug out after a month. What's it going to be like out there where people were not prepared for a month? They've already been out in the streets for a month. They're exhausted, low on energy. They're going to have a much harder time, and you're going to fare much better because you're able to actually have that extra time in your house before you did finally leave. So, moral of the story, you need to prepare now. You need to be ready because I think some troubled times are coming, and I think you probably see it that way too. But even if they weren't, it's going to give you some peace of mind. You're not going to have the fear because you're prepared. But even more importantly, if it does happen, you preparing for bugging in like this, your life just may depend on it.